Welcome to Spotlight Television. I'm Damon Roberts. Building the right team to fuel your company's growth is critical to long-term success. As businesses look for ways to spark new growth and outrun competitors in this unpredictable market, on-demand executives can offer a fresh, experienced perspective. Companies are recruiting for the future, and the importance of having effective HR processes and leadership within a business has never been higher. Today we're going to talk about fractional HR and how it is revolutionizing businesses. Considered a game changer, fractional HR offers a host of benefits that can empower a business to thrive and tap into a wealth of advantages. Joining me today is Eric Torigian, the Managing Director of CHRO Solutions. He's a highly effective business leader with 20+ years of global experience, driving organizational performance through strategic HR leadership. Known as an HR influencer and pioneer of fractional HR, Eric is transforming the world of human resources. Eric, welcome to Spotlight Television.
Thanks, Damon. It's great to be back. It's wonderful to see you again.
It's great to see you again, too. We did speak earlier in the year, and I went back and listened to that conversation, and I said something in my opening that's very interesting. I said this would be the year, 2023 would be the year for small to mid-sized businesses to gain an advantage through fractional HR. Has that happened?
Yeah, and what a year it's been. And what we've seen is more and more movement towards this private equity ownership of companies. You know, right now there's 4,500 roughly private equity companies in the US, and they run around 10,000 businesses, employing 11 million people. That's $1 trillion in wages that private equity is putting out in the marketplace every day. What we're seeing there is a drive around performance. And then as we talked, how do you drive performance in an organization? But it's leadership effectiveness. So the more that we're seeing fractional HR drive leadership effectiveness, we're seeing performance come in these companies. And it's just been a wonderful year.
Yeah. So let's take a step back. You covered a lot of good things there, but let's step back for the audience. Let's talk about what is fractional HR and how did you start your career in it? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's something that I answer a lot. And what you have is this mid-sized market company, right? They can't afford to go hire a global CHRO. And if they wanted to, I'd tell them they're crazy because you're just going to put all this administrative burden on your company that you don't need. So what the fractional executive does is we have a model where you can get all of this experience, you can get this thought leadership, you can get this critical thought on your team at an affordable package price.
So how did you get into this? This is, I'm sure there's a big swath of the audience that's maybe hearing this for the first time, hasn't really heard about fractional HR. How did you find your way into this business?
Yeah, it was an interesting journey. So I've spent 30 years in transformational HR. So I've worked for some of the biggest names, Ford, Pepsi, Comcast, NBC Universal, and I've worked for a lot of the US automotive manufacturing supply base and always in the roles that I was taking on the roles that no one else wanted, and I was taking on these difficult assignments, but what I was doing was getting experience that no one else is able to get. One of my last full-time roles, I was the global CHRO for a financial services company. We grew from 2,000 to 8,000 global employees and went through a private equity transaction. So at the end of the transaction, I was getting ready to go look for another big HR role. And I thought to myself, well, if this is what I'm going to do, and this is what I'm really good at, there's a lot of companies that could utilize these services, but they don't need to go hire a full-time person of my level. So can I package this together and do this for a group of companies? And that's what I created. I started this in January of 22, and it's been just this exciting run and really pioneering the usage of fractional HR executives at a price point that these smaller companies can afford, but giving them world-class HR.
Yeah, and you say price point, and that leads me into kind of the next thing I want to talk about, because I think when companies, when they contract for a fractional executive, let's talk about what kind of cost the business incurs. Recruiting, PTO, employee benefits. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of costs in there, and I think you've nailed a very important subject. What we found has worked the best for my clients is we're able to do a fixed fee. So they can put into their budget, it's a fixed fee, it's a reoccurring expense, and then we don't sit and try to do billable hours like your labor attorneys will, and it's a much simpler system for them to use. Then what you get is we're managing all those expenses. So we manage all of those costs for you. What you also get is a HR team who now understands people operations expenses, or PEOP OpEx, as people like to call it nowadays, right? But we're a group, and I'll give you a great example. I have a client company. I came in, we looked at their benefits. They were way out of line for the size of company they had. Administratively, they spent more time administrating their benefits for 300 employees than we spent for 8,000 employees. Wow. The costs were way out of board. They had a broker who was loading them up with high commission products. So we blew it up, took it all apart, put together a new benefits plan for them, and they're going to save anywhere from $70,000 to $150,000 a year, give their employees better benefits that are more recognized in the marketplace, and their employees' weekly contribution went down. So think about this as a business owner. Your employee experience improved, your employee's paycheck improved, so that's the cost of eggs calculation, right? So their take-home pay went up. Now they have a brand name insurance card in their pocket, and I took all this administrative burden that your HR and finance team was dealing with and moved it to the broker who's a more effective broker. That's what fractional HR can do for a company.
And speaking of the companies, and let's say the company size, because when you think about like a high-level C-suite executive, you'd figure that would come at a tremendous cost. You know, and if you're a startup, let's say you've got 10 employees, 50 employees, and you're thinking, man, I really need that high-powered brain, somebody who's been there. I want to buy that experience, but that's got to come at a tremendous cost. So if you're a startup or a smaller company, and you can talk to me about the size of companies you're working with, does fractional HR help you kind of get that upper level C-suite executive, but maybe not at the cost that you would think it brings to the company?
Yeah, Damon, that's exactly what fractional HR is able to do. So I work with companies. I have a client who has 2 employees, but they need that high-level thought leadership right now around their organization. You know, they have a very high likelihood of scaling. And as I tell everybody, if you take a broken system and scale it, you just get a very broken system. Yeah. So now's the time to lay down your processes, put your systems in place. All the way up to companies, you know, we have companies that have 4,000 employees. The typical size, to get to your question, that 200 to 300 employees, they're going to do around 70 to 100 million a year in revenue. They have a CFO on the team. They don't have an HR leader today, or maybe they have an administrative HR person. Maybe they're using a PEO, a professional employment organization. Maybe they're using ADP or a payroll provider to do their HR processing. These are going to get your compliance. They're going to get your basic daily HR work done. They're not going to get you strategic thought leadership. No one's going to sit down and say, here's what our 5-year people plan has to look like. Here's our strategy around benefits for the next 5 years. Here's our strategy around raises. This is how we're going to do compensation. Here's how we're going to recruit. This is how we're going to, our employee value proposition. This is how we're going to go to market to go hire people for your firm. That's what you need someone at that C-suite level. But again, as you said, if I'm running a small firm, I got 50 people in there, we're running really lean, I can't go spend the kind of figures I need to for a global CHRO. But if you can engage with my firm, we do it for a fixed fee, you can work it into your budget, and you'll get all that thought leadership.
Let's talk about, you mentioned private equity in your opening. Let's talk about private equity, because you think about what private equity does. They go in, they find either distressed companies, companies that need a turnaround. You think about what they do, they try to pick them up, turn them around, either unload them, take them public. I guess there's many avenues of what private equity does. Fractional HR executives, when you think about them in driving performance at private equity, talk to me about that.
Yeah, and I just had this conversation with a couple people from a pretty significant private equity last night, actually. And we talked a lot about this. What's the real art in being a private equity fund manager? Well, it's go find a company who's got solid process, solid product, they're in a good competitive marketplace, but their leadership is not up to the new challenge, right? So that's the easiest thing to fix. So if I can make that investment, then I can fix their leadership. I can quickly turn that company and get them in the right direction.
Can you define when you say their leadership is not up to the challenge? Meaning what? What are they not doing?
Yeah, so typically what you see when a private equity purchases a portfolio company is they're buying it from an owner, from a founder, someone who sort of grew this from the grassroots. Many times this grows beyond their capability as a business person. So it's a passion project, but they do it well, and they do such a good job of it that it grows. Now it sort of outgrows their leadership capability. So they go look for ownership. They partner with a private equity firm. Private equity brings in a couple things, right? Equity and capital. So they give you money to help run the business, but then they give you support. And what support are they? They're very, very good at giving you support around things like financial leadership, how to do your modeling your finances, how to do future looks for your financials. Very good at operations. They're very good at managing supply chain. Where they're weaker is on managing people. So that's where my firm comes in, and we help put leadership effectiveness in. And we've developed this great tool. It's called the Leadership Maturity Model, and it evaluates leadership across 8 different tracks, and then it does 10 different levels. So what I do is I look at things like how are your company policies set up? How do you communicate? How is your organization designed? How do you manage change? Then what's your talent acquisition? How are you attracting people to the company? What's your talent management process? So once you've hired them, how do you develop them? How do you manage their performance? How do you set goals for people? To total rewards, how are you paying people? What are their benefits? What's the value of being part of the company? And then employee engagement. How are you engaging them beyond just their job? So you're getting that voluntary work out of them. And then, David, I know what's in the back of your mind is, well, what about culture? And this is the question I always get is, hey, help me fix my culture. Well, you can't manage culture. So the F of X, the formula to get to culture, is those 8 tracks. So what I do is I use those 8 tracks to predict and manage your culture. What we like about the tool and where we've seen it be very effective is it measures you graphically. So we score you out, and then unlike most consultants who come in with a PowerPoint and a promise, we actually develop action plans. So we'll say, okay, you're a level 2 for communication, and you're a level 1 for change leadership, and we'll map everything out. Then the first thing we do is we get everything to the same level. So we get you to a level 2 leadership company. Then we build action plans to say, okay, what does level 3 look like? What does level 4 look like? How do I get to level 10, which is world class? The other question I know that you're getting ready to ask me, and this is one I get all the time, is, well, what scores good? And this is one of those exercises where a 2 is not better than a 3. So you don't have to have a certain score. What you have to do is better than you did yesterday. So we look at where you are today, and we make sure tomorrow you're doing slightly better. Gotcha. And this is all about continuous improvement and growth.
Are you dealing with more public companies, private companies? Does this work better for one or the other? Or tell me about that.
It's pretty open from that perspective. We tend to deal with smaller, that mid-market and below, so they tend to not be public companies yet. This is a great way to set you up for an IPO. Yeah. So I have taken a firm through an IPO, and a lot of the things that will happen during an IPO, and you have law firms out there who are making a fortune doing this, it's all around the financial modeling and the financial performance. But you need to also do these things around leadership and people, and how are you going to run the organization? And sometimes it's as simple as, how am I going to set goals? So how do I set the goals for the company? How do I make sure that everyone has aligned goals so they're all working on the right things? And then how am I going to tie pay to performance? And my HR operating system does all of that for organizations.
Do you find the problems with a lot of these companies are in the goals, like you say, in the vision, or more in the people and the leadership?
Well, here's what I've learned. I have learned that organizationally, we're very good at meeting goals. So every organization I've ever been in for the past 30 plus years, all the goals get met. So the real challenge becomes, do I have the right goals? And I remember a conversation I had with the CEO one day, and he had 3 primary goals for the company. And he basically said, if we do these 3 things, we can, and they were in a turnaround mode, if we can do these 3 things over the next year, year and a half, we'll avoid bankruptcy. Great. So I went out and I started talking to the team, talking to his people, and asking questions around the goals, and what are you doing? What are you working on? Where is this? And he calls me up and he says, hey, Eric, I need you to stop talking to people about our 3 goals. I said, okay, give me more. What are you thinking? Where's your head at? He said, well, we never share it. We never shared those 3 goals with people, and you're confusing them. And I said, well, wait a minute. If you're going to tell me that these are the 3 things we need to do to avoid bankruptcy, then not only is it imperative that everybody understands that, if they're doing anything but that, they should stop. That's where I think organizations struggle. They struggle around setting meaningful goals and then aligning their teams to those goals. Because once you've done that, you can just let them go. And then you can have confidence they're going to get the right things done.
You know, what's interesting about that is you sometimes, and I'm sure you find this experience, that you have like, you spoke of like the owner who like brings it from, it's its baby, brings it from birth to maturity to a point where, you know, maybe then it becomes out of their reach. But I find that like the disconnect is not usually from the top to the employees. It's kind of that middle management that sits underneath the executive. There's always that disconnect between them and the employees on what's going on. Is that a problem you run into a lot? Either you have disconnect between like that middle management and employee, and you run into a lot of owners that because it's their baby and they've brought it to a place, they don't recognize that it's now beyond them. How much coaching, teaching, not pressuring, but saying, hey, maybe it's time to bring somebody in to take this to the next level. How much of that do you deal with?
A lot. And on the leadership coaching side, one of the things that we find a lot is that most people running a business don't realize they're running a business. And I know that sounds funny to say, but they don't realize what it means to run a business. So many times leadership coaching is laying out for them what are the steps you need to do to run a business, how do you effectively do it. And then during your question, I got a smile on my face because what you see in an organization, I remember I was at Ford in the late 80s and they were preparing for Ford 2000 was the big drive, and what are we going to look like in the year 2000? And one of the leaders called it the layer of clay. And he kept referring to the layer of clay. And this was the leadership level that was below. So senior leadership was aligned. And then the workers, right? Everyone's aligned. It's this layer of clay that existed in between where the water couldn't penetrate. And that was where you really had to do a lot of work. Now, I've taken that and extrapolated. Here's what I see in many of these small businesses. Because you do have the owner, it was their baby. So what are they used to doing? Well, if I have a supply chain issue, I just go walk down the hall and I talk to Sally. Right. And then now what they've done is as their organization grows, they just bypass like 2 or 3 levels of people. Now you start to get disconnects and you start to break the organization. They think they're doing the right thing. They're going right to the person who needs to know, which is the right thing, but you've got to keep the organization aligned. And as you get bigger, you got to keep everything moving in the right direction.
It's always interesting to me how many great ideas lay sometimes with the employees in these companies, and they never make it to the decision maker because the guy in the middle says, oh, no, you're not taking that to him. You get this middle management problem where they kind of almost a blockade on what could be good ideas for the company to move forward.
And worse, you have people that are escalating things that are meaningful that need senior leadership to give opinions on and to make decisions on. But that middle level, because they're somewhat marginalized, they're afraid to be transparent and to be honest. So they cleanse it and they sanitize it. Yeah. So the senior leader is getting a sanitized version of everything, so we're not working on the right problems. So problems don't get resolved. And then a problem avoided is not a problem resolved.
Yeah. So let's turn to current day financial situation in the country and how businesses are dealing with it. When we think about the other side of business, and that of course is obviously the financial cost companies are incurring from laying off workers. Obviously you see what's going on in the country. You have obviously inflation extremely high. You have a Fed who's fighting it with raising interest rates. Cost of capital has gone through the roof. There's just a lot of issues right now, obviously, and you see a lot of layoffs. You're starting to see layoffs in some of the bigger companies. So some of the costs around severance and things like that companies are incurring and that we're reading about, these are enormous numbers. Does fractional HR play any role for companies that have to do that, as painful as it is, making those costs more manageable?
Yes. What we like to do with fractional HR when we're addressing those situations is help the companies manage the costs holistically. So how do we look at it across your organization? And I had a client who came to me and they said, we need to do a reduction in force. and we're going to shut down our shift and we're going to lay off the third shift. I said, okay, why is my first question. What are you addressing? Is this just an immediate reaction to some financials, or are you really addressing a problem?
Right.
Because what I see is a lot of times it's a reaction. It's a very numbers-driven world, and people tend to do the knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah.
Well, volume's going to fall off, but we think it's going to come back. Well, then why would you lay those people off? Because what you're going to incur is all of these extra costs. Can we do something different with them? What will we do different with them? Well, can we do a training? Can we do some cross-training? Oh yeah, we've always wanted to cross-train on day shift so we can have third shift run similar to day shift. Well, then why don't we, instead of paying severance, let's consider this a training budget. Let's bring those people onto day shift, keep them employed, maybe reduce their hours. They're happy, they're getting the minimum, so it's better than unemployment for them. We've cross-trained them. Now for this particular client, one of their number one customers said, we can double your volume if you can handle it. Well, they were ready to flex. So then they were able to flex that load in and turn the third shift back on and respond to that customer's need.
There's a lot of talk in the business world about the metaverse. Obviously, one of the biggest companies in the world changed their name to Meta because they were going to focus around it. You're hearing a lot of talk about the metaverse, people buying land in the metaverse, people doing this in the metaverse. What is the metaverse, and is this something that you see coming to fruition? Something that's going to take a big change in the business world? What's your perspective on the metaverse?
That's a great topic, and there is a lot of conversation going on right now about things like metaverse and AI and products like ChatGPT and all of this new technology, and how are we going to integrate it into our business? And everyone's scrambling. We got to be the first one to integrate this new technology. And oh my God, look at this technology, look at this technology. We got to have AI. What I think of when I look at these technologies is I went through the PC revolution in the late 70s, and I can remember the exact same conversations. Oh my God, we got to get a PC, we got to get a PC. This is going to be incredible, it's going to change our lives. And yes, it did change our lives. But it wasn't the device that changed our lives. It was what the device enabled that changed our lives. I remember telling my mom, I'm going to organize all your recipes, and we're going to put all your recipes on the computer. Well, that was what changed lives, not the fact that you had a computer. Right. And I think we're at the same place today with AI, metaverse, all these new hot technologies that are out there. Yes, they're going to change things, but we have to look to what do they enable. So if I can use the metaverse to enable remote work or to enable engagement, now I have a valuable product. We are working on an HR metaverse where we can have this virtual library for people to come and pull HR tools out of. We have a virtual training space where you can come and do things like our HR Master Series program. And they're virtual, they're in the metaverse, they're exciting, it's exciting technology. That's great. What matters though is what are we enabling? Right. If I can actually enable HR people to do a better job communicating with each other, to share ideas, to grow, now I've done something with the technology.
Yeah, that's interesting. So more of the parts than more the sum of the part right now is kind of what you see in there, like what it's enabling us to do through the main technology.
And then remember when the iPhone came out, everyone was looking for what's the killer app? What's that one app that's going to really make this thing spark and go over the top? Well, that is, how do I solve a problem? I always go back to my original sales training. So in my very, very first job, I was programming computers for a medical billing company. We were writing software for hospitals, and the owner of the company took me under his wing and made me a salesman. And we drove around in a car listening to cassettes, and we used to listen to Dale Carnegie. And I learned how to sell through these old school traditional sales processes. And what that was is very simple. You go to somebody, you identify a problem that they have, and then you help them create a solution to their problem. So if I go to somebody and I give them a solution, there's a very low likelihood that they're going to implement that, and then it's going to stick. But if I can get there, if I can help them understand their problem, help them frame up their problem, and then help them see a solution, and then enable their implementation, that's going to stick. And that's leadership in a nutshell. And that's what my HR operating system and my leadership maturity model are all about. How do you, as a function and as a leader, identify what support your people need and help them solve the problem? They're the hero in the story.
And that's interesting. It leads me to my next question to you, because I know besides what you're doing at CHRO, obviously, when people obviously listen to you, even hear and watch you, obviously you're very engaged, very personable. And I know you've taken on some kind of, and obviously it's important to your business too, but some other more personal coaching, dealing with individuals one-on-one. Talk to me a little bit about what you've done in that arena and why it's so important to you.
Yeah, it is very, very important to me. And one of the things I decided when I started this was I was going to do something different. And I developed this tool that I use a lot now with people as I'm coaching them. And what we do is we use a graph, we make two axes. And up the vertical axis, we put how much do you enjoy a task? And across the bottom axis, we graph how much are organizations willing to pay? So how much can you monetize this thing? So real quickly, you get 4 quadrants. All right, so if I start in the upper left-hand quadrant, I have things that you love doing that are not very easy to monetize, that organizations are not going to pay you a lot for. So I call those your hobbies. When we move over into the next quadrant, so upper right, these are the things that you're very, very good at that companies are really interested in paying you for. That's the sweet spot. Dropping down, I have the things that you don't particularly enjoy doing, but the companies are going to pay. There's a big need for them. There's monetization. I call those the dues. Those are the things that you just have to do. You got to pay your dues. Right. The real problem quadrant becomes that first quadrant, which is where you don't particularly enjoy doing it and companies don't particularly pay well for it. But when I start to graph people out, that's the quadrant where they end up spending most of their time. So I have this crescent that I form. So the crescent is primarily in that upper right-hand quadrant. It's primarily where I want people working, and then 2 tails. One tail sticking into the quadrant where you're doing the things that you love, and one tail sticking down into the quadrant where you're sort of paying your administrative dues to the company. That's where you're most effective. So what I found is when I start to do this with people and start to graph out their capabilities versus the value to the company, and I do this for private equity firms too with their teams, and we just call it something different. We call it capabilities and we call it EBITDA impact. But you really start to see that many times you have people who are not even working on the right things. So as I can start to influence you into that upper quadrant, then I can really light you on fire. What I can't do is give you passion. That's got to come. But hopefully when I build this framework for you and I show you the guardrails and I encourage you along, and people told me my energy is contagious, so they pick up a bit of it, we get it running and rolling, it works great. I've seen people who've done it and they've sat and they keep wanting me to push them and they're just not gonna, it's not gonna work.
So running a private equity firm has to be tough business, hard work. Someone like you, through your eyes, what do you see as the challenges that portfolio managers have in running a private equity firm?
Great question and great observation, Damon. I've been studying private equity and private equity-led companies for many years now. Here's what I've learned. Those private equity fund managers are frustrated with many of their portfolio company leaders. And then when I start to talk to those portfolio company leaders, they're frustrated with the private equity ownership. And when I really start to break it down, they're all frustrated over the same thing. There's a disconnect in how they're talking to each other. So that's one of the places where I've found I can engage and put some communication bridges in place. So, for example, I have a CFO at one of my client companies, and he's frustrated, and I've been able to coach him around, hey, you have to bring deliverables. So if you can bring deliverables, this is, the private equity fund manager is a Wall Street, this is how they think, this is how they look at things. You need to bring solutions, then you can have the conversation. Then that helps the portfolio fund manager feel more comfortable, that it makes the local leadership team more comfortable. So a lot of what I see in portfolio companies is leaders who are not comfortable talking to those private equity portfolio managers. So the private equity portfolio manager is trying to help, trying to enable change, and then they have people on the other side of that conversation who are uncomfortable. So if I can build that leadership bridge between them, it really builds an effective
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah, because when you think about this business, you would think it would seem very easy to kind of get stuck in the mud, stuck in your own habits, and not be open to those kind of conversations. That would seem to be something that would definitely be an issue. Obviously, you're saying it is.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just a matter of recognizing that things changed. So you went from an ownership model where you had one person in charge, they started it, they built it, they knew everything about it, they were in charge, to now you have another group of people that have an opinion on the business. And you have to figure out a way to engage that and do it in a not scary fashion. And you've got to help people understand, and I go right back to values and goal setting. So the more I understand the values, the more I understand the direction of the company, and the better job I do setting goals, the better that relationship's going to be with that portfolio fund manager, the better the performance is going to be, the happier those LPs and GPs at the fund are going to be, because we're going to turn results and we're going to provide value.
Can you work with a company that already has HR in place? Let's say they're moderately successful, the company seems to be moderately happy with them, but maybe there's something missing and they contact you or you contact them. Is there something that you can do to work with a company that already has some of this in place?
Another great question. And what I've found is having a great HR leader in place, this is not about pushing him or her out of their role. This is about making them more effective in their role. So if I can bring all of these tools, processes around leadership in place, we can really amplify what they're able to do. So it takes the really, really good HR leader and amplifies what they're able to do for the organization.
You know what I'm finding in our discussion? This is very interesting, because I think when you think about this topic, I think people think about HR and they have a kind of a predetermined idea of what HR is, some guy sitting in a corner office that no one wants to speak to. But you guys seem to make this topic extremely interesting, engaging, and fun. How do you guys do that?
So number one thing was, I tell everybody, be yourself. Unless you're a jerk, then be someone else. But just be yourself, be authentic, be real, build trust. The only way to lead is to have trust. And the only way to have trust is to be authentic. And the only way to be authentic is to really be yourself. Relax, have some fun. Don't be afraid of fun in the organization. Don't be afraid of people having conversations. Don't be afraid of being vulnerable. I remember when I was at Frito-Lay, we had a little cookout, and the plant manager, who was a very difficult person and most people didn't like to deal with, and we were cooking hot dogs and hamburgers, and I had a whole tray of hamburgers ready to go, and he picked it up for me, turned around, dropped it on the ground. And that became a plant story for years. And that's the kind of things that make good teams. And if you want to have a strong team, you got to be authentic and have some fun.
Well, your energy is contagious. There's no doubt about that. Let's tell people where they can get more information, obviously on all your techniques, everything you're doing, how to contact the company if they're interested in working with you. Tell everybody where they can go to get more information. Yeah,
I'm looking forward to having a discussion with everybody. So there's a couple ways you get a hold of me. And I've been doing this at every job I've ever had. Here's my personal cell phone number, 248-207-1253. You can call me, you can text me. I will tell you this, if you call me, I'm not going to recognize your phone number, I'm not going to answer it. But I got this new technology, it's called voicemail. Leave me a message. We'll get back to you, we'll talk to you, we'll engage in the discussion. You can email me. It's eric.torigian@chrosolutions-us.com. You can find us on LinkedIn. I post every day, 8:15 a.m., a topic on leadership, private equity, careers. Come join in the discussion. We have some great engagement there, some great discussions. We're on Instagram @Corner Office Lessons. We're on YouTube. You can find our YouTube channel, Lessons from the Corner Office. We're just looking to have the discussion, engage in the conversation.
That's great stuff. Eric, thank you so much. I'm sure people will reach out. It's been a great discussion. Thank you for appearing on Spotlight Television.
Thanks, Damon. It was a pleasure to be here.
And we'll be right back.